After the wildfire took my ranch, my own sister told me to be responsible and shut the door. I found a night job, and a water hauler named Marcus started giving me rides across the desert. Today, he didn't slow down. He locked the doors and said, "Don't look back. Your sister's people are at the dry well, and they're holding a file with your name on it." The fire didn't take everything at once. First, it took the grass, then the fencing, then the shed where I kept my tools. By the third day, the wind shifted, and the flames came straight for the house. I'm Arthur Hale. I was 64 that summer. I'd lived on that ranch most of my life, long enough to know the sound of dry soil cracking under your boots, long enough to recognize when the land had stopped forgiving you. Years of drought had already weakened everything. The wildfire just finished the job. When the evacuation order came through, I packed what fit in one bag: a change of clothes, my wallet, the old deed papers I kept wrapped in a towel, even though part of me already knew they wouldn't save anything. I watched the smoke from the highway, thick, black, the kind that doesn't rush because it knows it has time. 2 days later, the sheriff told me there was nothing left to go back to. No house, no well. Just scorched posts sticking out of the ground like bad memories. That night I sat in my truck and stared at my phone for a long time before calling my sister. Veronica owned land all over the county: solar leases, grazing rights, storage tanks. She liked to say she'd played it smart, like the rest of us had simply failed some test we didn't know we were taking. When she picked up, her voice was calm, almost relieved. I told her what happened. I told her I didn't need much, just somewhere to sleep for a bit, a couch, a trailer, anything until I figured things out. There was a pause, not a long one, just enough to feel measured.
Then she sighed and said,
"Arthur, this is exactly why I told you years ago not to cling to that land."
She didn't ask if I was safe. She didn't ask where I was calling from. She talked about responsibility, about planning ahead, about how people can't keep expecting family to bail them out of bad decisions. She said helping me wouldn't actually help me. It would enable dependency. I remember gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. Not because I was angry, because part of me was still hoping she'd change her mind. Instead, she said something I'd hear again later, almost word for word.
"If I step in now, you'll never learn."
After the call ended, I sat there longer than I should have. The cab smelled like smoke and dust. My phone felt heavier than it had any right to. What stayed with me wasn't just that she said no. It was how cleanly she did it. How the refusal came wrapped in language that made it sound like wisdom. That's the part people don't talk about.
When strangers turn you away, it hurts. But when family does it, they usually hand you a reason you're supposed to accept. Something that sounds logical enough to swallow, even when it burns on the way down. That night I slept in the truck behind a closed gas station. The wind rattled the empty signs. Ash drifted through the air like gray snow. I kept replaying the call in my head, asking myself questions I didn't want the answers to. Had I really made that many wrong choices? Was this somehow my fault? By morning, the sun came up red through the haze. I washed my face in a restroom sink and looked at myself in the mirror. No home, no address, and suddenly, no family I could turn to. That was the moment I realized something had shifted. Not just my circumstances, my place. Because when the land burned, I lost my ranch. But when my sister explained why she wouldn't help, I lost the idea that blood automatically meant shelter. And once that idea is gone, you don't know where home is anymore. Follow this story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, because I still can't believe how far one simple act of kindness carried me. After Veronica turned me away, I did what people like her always assume you won't do. I kept moving. The next morning, I drove into a little desert town that used to survive off mining. Now it survived off whatever passed through: truckers, dust, and people who didn't ask questions. I parked behind a diner that smelled like burnt coffee and fryer oil, and I walked in wearing the same jeans I'd slept in. There was a corkboard by the register with job ads curling at the corners: day labor, cleanup crew, fuel station attendant. I took the first one that didn't require an address. It was temporary work, the kind where nobody learns your name unless you mess up. I was paid by the day, cash in an envelope, no benefits, no promises. I didn't care. All I needed was enough to keep the truck running and to afford a cheap room when the heat got too sharp at night. By the end of that first week, I learned the rhythm of the place. Mornings started cold, then the sun rose and everything turned the color of copper. By noon, the air felt like it had weight, and water wasn't just something you drank. Water was a currency. That's when I noticed the water trucks. Big tankers rolling down the highway like they owned the horizon. They'd pull into a fuel stop outside town, fill up, and head back out, supplying small ranches, drilling sites, and scattered homes that didn't have reliable wells anymore. One morning, as I was leaving the diner with my coffee, I saw one of those tankers stopped at the shoulder. A man stood by the cab, checking something near the back like he'd done it 1,000 times. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't angry. He just looked steady. I recognized that kind of steadiness. You only get it after life has taken something from you, and you've stopped arguing with the sky about it. When I walked past, my truck coughed like it was about to die. The engine made that sound that tells you, not today. I popped the hood and stared at it, like staring harder would fix anything. I didn't have tools. I didn't have a plan. I just had that heavy feeling in my chest that comes right before you ask for help again. The man from the tanker watched for a second. Then he said, "Battery?" His voice was calm, not curious, not suspicious, just practical. I nodded. He walked over, crouched beside my engine, and without saying another word, he tightened a loose terminal with a small wrench he pulled from his pocket like it was part of him. Then he stood up, wiped his hands on his pants, and said, "Try it." I turned the key. The truck started. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. "Thanks," I said. He just nodded, like it wasn't worth keeping score. As he started walking back to his tanker, he added, "You headed into town?" "Yeah," I said, "just trying to find work." He looked at my truck, then at me. "Hop in," he said. "I'm rolling that way." That was it. No, what happened to you? No, where's your family? No, how'd you end up like this? Just hop in. His name was Marcus Reed. I learned it because it was printed on a faded badge clipped to his shirt. And because on the second day, when I tried to thank him again, he finally said, "Marcus," like giving his name was the most he wanted to give. For the first few rides, I sat stiff in the passenger seat, like I didn't deserve to be there. Marcus didn't fill the silence with advice. He didn't offer me sermons dressed up as concern. He'd drive with one hand on the wheel, the other resting near an old radio that crackled with weather reports and dispatch calls. Sometimes country music, sometimes nothing but static. And every morning, right at the same time, he'd pull into that same spot by the diner. If my truck started, I'd wave and keep going. If it didn't, he'd roll down the window and say the same thing. "Hop in." After about 2 weeks, I started bringing him something small. Not because he asked, because I needed to feel like I wasn't just taking. A cold bottle of water, a pack of peanuts, a piece of bread from the diner wrapped in a napkin. The first time I handed it to him, he glanced at it like he didn't know what to do with kindness that didn't come with strings. Then he took it and said, "Appreciate it." And that was the moment something shifted. Because I realized the people who help you the most are often the ones who don't need a story first. They don't need to know your past to treat you like a human being. They don't need you to prove you're worthy. They just see you standing in the heat with nowhere to go, and they decide not to leave you there.
But here's what I didn't tell Marcus. The hardest part wasn't the fire. It wasn't losing the house or the land or the well. The hardest part was the quiet after. There's a kind of pain that doesn't show up when disaster hits. It shows up later, when everything is still. When you finally close the door of a cheap room and the silence settles on you like dust. When the only sound is an old air conditioner rattling and your own breathing. And you realize nobody is going to check on you. Nobody is going to ask if you ate. Nobody is going to text, "You make it in okay?" I used to think family was something permanent, like the land itself. Maybe it cracked, maybe it dried out, but it was still yours. Then I realized something worse. Some roofs don't just leak. Some roofs are taken apart on purpose, one piece at a time, so you stay exposed. That's what Veronica did. Not with fire, with distance, with words. With that cold kind of moral talk that makes you feel guilty for needing anything. Marcus didn't do any of that. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't try to teach me a lesson. He just opened a door and let me sit somewhere safe for 15 minutes in the morning. And that's what made me choke up sometimes, staring out at the desert like it could hide the lump in my throat. Because the simplest kindness hits the hardest when you've been told you don't deserve any. There were days I feared the calm more than I feared the crisis. Because in the calm, you can hear your dignity wearing thin. You can hear the question you don't want to ask out loud. Am I someone people leave behind? And every time Marcus pulled up and said, "Hop in," he answered that question without even knowing he was answering it. But what I didn't know back then was that someone else had been watching those mornings too. And they weren't watching because they were proud I'd found a way to survive.
They were watching because they didn't want me to. About 3 weeks after I started riding with Marcus, things got quieter on the surface. I had a routine. I'd wake up before sunrise in that little room that smelled like bleach and warm dust. I'd wash my face in a sink that never got fully cold. I'd check my wallet like the cash might disappear if I didn't look at it. Then I'd drive into town, take whatever work I could get, and tell myself I was rebuilding, one day at a time. For the first time since the fire, I wasn't asking anyone for anything. And I thought that meant I was safe. I was wrong. It started with small things. The kind of small things you could blame on bad luck if you didn't want to look too hard. One Monday, the foreman at the cleanup crew didn't call me back. He'd promised he would. He'd even slapped my shoulder and said, "You show up like you have, you'll be fine." But when I walked into the lot, he wouldn't meet my eyes. He stared past me like I was a stranger. "Sorry," he said, "we're full." I didn't argue. I just nodded and stepped away. The next day, I went to the fuel station. They had a handwritten sign, "Hiring, start today." A young manager took my name and number, looked at my ID, and smiled like everything was normal. Then his smile flattened. Not because of my age, not because of my clothes, because of something on his screen. He cleared his throat and slid my ID back like it was hot. We'll call you. He didn't. The third time it happened, I started to feel it in my stomach before I even walked inside. Like my body was learning the pattern before my mind wanted to admit it. I'd step up to a counter. I'd introduce myself. Someone would be friendly for 10 seconds. Then they'd look at a paper or a phone or a computer, and something would shift. Their shoulders tightened. Their voice got careful. And suddenly I wasn't a man looking for work.
I was a problem they didn't want near their business. I told myself it was my fault. That's what you do when you've been shamed long enough. You start narrating your own downfall for the people who don't even know you. Maybe I look too tired. Maybe I sound desperate. Maybe I'm just too old. But then the town started changing too. People I'd nodded at every morning stopped nodding back. A waitress who used to refill my coffee without asking suddenly left my cup empty until I paid first. One guy I worked alongside for 2 days straight saw me in the parking lot and turned around like he forgot something in his truck. I didn't know how to describe it. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic. It was social silence. Like someone had flipped a switch and made me unsafe to be around. And that kind of thing messes with your head more than a punch ever could, because you can't defend yourself against a rumor you haven't heard. You can't argue with a story you don't even know is being told. One afternoon, I finally overheard it. I was standing outside the diner waiting for Marcus when 2 men walked out behind me. One of them didn't realize I could hear, or maybe he didn't care. "That's him," he said, low but clear. "The guy from the water mess." The other one scoffed. "I heard he poisoned a well." "Nah," the first one replied. "Not poisoned, but he did something. They said the county's involved. Environmental thing. Environmental thing." I stood there with my coffee going cold in my hand and my ears ringing like I'd been slapped. Because it wasn't just that they believed it. It was how easily they believed it. How quickly a man becomes dangerous in people's minds when they're given a label that sounds official. I didn't poison anything. I didn't sabotage anyone's water. If anything, I'd spent my whole life trying not to be a burden. But someone out there had taken my name and attached it to the kind of accusation you can't wash off with truth. And that's when I understood something people don't want to admit. It's cheaper to ruin a person's reputation than it is to ruin their body. It doesn't require a weapon. It doesn't leave blood. It just leaves you alone. Marcus noticed before I said a word. He pulled up in the tanker, and when I climbed in, I didn't have my usual small offering. No water bottle, no bread. I just sat there, staring out at the highway like it had answers. He glanced at me once, then said, "Something's off." I tried to laugh it off. "It's nothing," I said. But my voice didn't match the words. Marcus kept driving. A minute passed. Then he said, 3 places in a week don't forget to call you back. Not out here." I swallowed. The desert rolled by in long, flat silence. And then I finally told him what I'd heard. "The water mess," I said. "That's what they're calling it." Like I did something to a well. Like I'm dangerous. Marcus's jaw tightened. He didn't explode. He didn't rant. He just got quiet in that way men get when they're doing math in their heads. "Who told them that?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "I don't even know where it started." Marcus tapped the steering wheel once. Then he said something that hit me harder than any insult Veronica had thrown at me. "Arthur, people don't make up a story that specific for fun." I stared at him. My throat felt dry. Because deep down, I already knew what he meant. This wasn't random. This was targeted. That night, after work, Marcus didn't drop me at my truck right away. He drove us to a quiet spot behind the fuel station where the lights didn't reach. He shut off the engine, and the sudden silence felt like a room closing around us. Then he reached into his glove compartment and pulled out a small notebook and an old folder. Nothing fancy, just worn paper with corners bent from use.
"What's that?" I asked. "Reality," he said. Then he looked at me, steady and serious. "No one teaches you this," he continued. "When things fall apart, feelings won't protect you. Being a good man won't protect you. Hoping people will be fair won't protect you." I didn't speak. I just listened. "Paper protects you," Marcus said. "Dates, names, receipts, anything that can't be argued with." He opened the notebook. Inside were simple notes, mileage logs, times, locations, the kind of things a man writes down when he can't afford to be careless. "I've been doing this for years," he said. "Not because I'm paranoid, because I've seen what happens when someone decides to rewrite your story." I felt my stomach turn, because that's exactly what was happening to me. Someone was rewriting my story, and they were doing it so quietly that I almost believed it myself. Marcus slid the notebook toward me. "Start tonight," he said. "Write down every place you apply, who you spoke to, what they said. Keep copies of everything you can. If you get a call, save it. If you get a letter, don't throw it out." I stared at the blank lines on the next page, and for a second I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not comfort, not relief. Clarity. Because I finally saw the real shape of the danger. It wasn't just that I had lost my land. It was that someone was making sure I couldn't build a life without it. And as Marcus started the engine again, he said one more thing, quiet, almost like he was talking to himself. "They don't need to hurt you if they can make everyone else do it for them." I looked out at the desert, at the endless road disappearing into heat, and I realized something else. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was being managed, watched, contained, and whoever was doing it knew exactly how to make a man disappear without ever laying a hand on him. 2 nights later, Marcus didn't drop me off at my truck.
He drove past the motel, past the last streetlight, and pulled into a quiet gravel lot behind an old supply store that had been closed since before the fire season got bad. The tanker hissed as it cooled. The desert air was sharp, like it had been waiting all day to remind you you're still alive. Marcus killed the engine, leaned forward, and rested his forearms on the steering wheel like he was about to say something he didn't want to say. "I made a few calls," he said. "I didn't ask who. I didn't ask why. I was past pretending this was normal life." "What did you find?" I asked. He reached behind his seat and pulled out a manila envelope that looked older than it should have been, like it had survived a lot of glove compartments. Then he pulled out a second thing, folded paper, printed and stamped, with a date that didn't belong to this year. He placed it on the dash under the dim glow of the radio light, and for a second, I just stared. My name was on it, not handwritten, not guessed, typed clean, like it had been part of an official story a long time ago. "Arthur Hale," Marcus read, slow. "Filed statement, public record." My throat tightened. "Where did you get that?" I asked. Marcus didn't smile. "From a file nobody in town talks about anymore," he said, "because it makes certain people look bad.
I looked down again, trying to make my eyes cooperate. The date hit me first. 20 years ago. Exactly. And suddenly my mind did that thing it does when it's trying to protect you, like it wanted to skip over it, like it wanted to say, that was a different life. But it wasn't. It was the same life, just buried. Why would my name be in an environmental file? I asked, even though I already felt the answer coming. Marcus tapped the paper with one finger. Because you said no, he said. Not to money, not to family drama, to something wrong. I swallowed hard. 20 years ago, there had been a proposal. A company wanted access to an old site, an extraction spot that everyone pretended was harmless because it meant jobs and checks and shiny new trucks for a few people. They promised it would be clean. They promised it would be safe. They promised it wouldn't touch the water. And I remember standing in a packed room that smelled like sweat and cheap coffee, watching people nod along because they didn't want to be the one to ruin the mood. I remember the way Veronica sat in the front row that night, legs crossed, hair perfect, eyes on the speaker like she was already imagining her future. And I remember raising my hand, not because I wanted attention, because I'd walked that land since I was a boy, because I'd seen what happens when you pretend the ground can't be poisoned, because I knew one thing deep in my bones: you don't gamble with water out here. I wasn't dramatic about it. I didn't yell. I asked questions, simple ones. What's the runoff plan? Who's liable if the well tests come back bad? Where's the independent inspection report? And I watched the room shift. Not because I was wrong, because I was inconvenient. Marcus flipped the page over and pointed to a line. Your statement slowed the whole thing down, he said. It forced a review. I stared at him. So, I asked. That was 20 years ago. Marcus exhaled through his nose. After the review, he said, the deal didn't die. It just changed hands. He pulled out another printout, this one newer. A clean summary with a chain of names, dates, transfers. And there it was again. Not my name, hers, Veronica's. She wasn't just doing well. She was involved. She benefited when the dust settled and people forgot why the file existed in the first place. I felt cold, not outside, inside. Because suddenly the story wasn't just about greed. It was about memory. It was about punishment. Some betrayals don't begin with money. They begin the moment you refuse to clap for something dirty. They begin when you say, I don't agree, and the wrong person hears it as, I'm going to expose you. I looked at Marcus and shook my head slowly. But why now? I asked. Why wait until I've got nothing? Marcus didn't answer right away. He picked up the papers and stacked them neatly, like he respected them. Then he said, because people like this don't just take what you have. They take your ability to recover. He paused. And because they know timing. My chest tightened as I thought about the fire, the drought, the insurance delays, the stress, the exhaustion. How easy it would have been for a person to slide paperwork through the cracks while I was just trying to find a place to sleep. And Marcus must have seen it on my face because he leaned back and said something that made my stomach drop. I'm going to tell you something most folks don't learn until it happens to them, he said. A lot of people think there's some big public moment when property changes hands. Like everyone gets called in, like there's an announcement. That's not how it works out here. I stared at him. Then how does it work? I asked. Marcus held up the envelope. Paperwork, he said, not speeches. He pointed toward the highway, like the county seat was sitting out there in the darkness. If one person controls the mail, the addresses, the contacts, They can steer the entire process, he said. They can send notices to an old address. They can file things while you're displaced. They can say, "We tried to reach him," and technically it's true because they sent something somewhere. My mouth went dry. "And if you don't know what to ask for," Marcus continued, "you assume nothing exists. You assume you've been cut out. You assume you're crazy for questioning it." He looked at me, steady. "That's how people get erased without a fight," he said. "Not because they're weak, because they're tired,
Because they're grieving. Because they still believe family would never do that. I felt my hands tighten in my lap. I thought about every time I'd told myself to let it go, every time I'd thought, she wouldn't take it that far. Every time I'd tried to be the bigger person. And all that being the bigger person had really done was give someone room to work. Marcus slid the folder toward me. "Your name never left that old file," he said. "That's the part that matters. Because it means there's a thread, a timeline, a reason." I stared at my own name on paper, and I felt something sharp click into place. It wasn't rage. It wasn't even sadness. It was understanding. This wasn't random sabotage. This was cleanup. Someone had waited until I was alone, displaced, and quiet. Then they tried to finish what they started decades ago. Not because I'd asked for money, because I'd once refused to stay silent. Marcus reached into the console and handed me a pen. "Write down what you remember," he said. "Names, dates, that meeting, anything." I took the pen, and my hand trembled slightly as I held it. "How long has she been doing this?" I whispered. Marcus didn't look away. "Long enough to think she's untouchable," he said, "which usually means she's gotten sloppy." He nodded toward the papers. "These came from somewhere," he said, "and people don't hide documents in empty air." Then he started the engine again, and the tanker's low rumble filled the night like a warning. As we pulled back onto the road, Marcus said one last thing. Quiet, almost casual, like he wasn't trying to scare me. "I followed a vehicle yesterday," he said. "Didn't get too close, just watched." My heart thudded. "Whose?" I asked. Marcus kept his eyes on the road. "Your sister's," he said, "and she didn't drive home." He paused. "She drove out past the old mining side of town," he said, "to a place nobody goes unless they're keeping something." And in that moment, I realized the truth hadn't disappeared. It had just been stored. And if we were willing to look, we were going to find where she'd buried it. The next afternoon, Marcus didn't take the main highway. He waited until the sun started to slide low, when the light turns the desert into a sheet of copper, and everything feels quieter than it should. Then he pointed the water tanker toward the old mining side of town. I hadn't been out there in years. Most people hadn't. The mines dried up, the jobs vanished, and the buildings were left behind like bones. Corrugated metal, broken windows, rusted chain-link fences that didn't really keep anyone out anymore, just told you, in a tired way, that somebody used to care. Marcus kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the radio, not turning it on, just resting there like he liked having a way to hear the world if he needed it. "You sure?" I asked him. He didn't look at me. "I'm sure she went there," he said. "I'm not sure what she thinks she's hiding." That answer sat heavy, because the truth was, I didn't want to be right. I wanted this to be a misunderstanding, a paperwork error, a bureaucratic mess that could be fixed by standing in the right line and saying the right words. But I'd already watched my name disappear from land that had my family's history in the dirt. That doesn't happen by accident. A mile before the mining road split, Marcus slowed down and killed the headlights. We rolled the last stretch with the engine barely breathing, tires crunching gravel like we were stepping on glass. In the distance, one building had a small light inside. Not bright, just enough to say someone was there. Marcus parked behind a collapsed loading bay, where the tanker blended in with the other abandoned equipment like it belonged. Then he turned and looked at me for the first time in a while. "This is the part where you stay calm," he said. "You don't talk yourself into courage. You just do what's next." I nodded, even though my hands were already sweating. We got out and moved low along the shadow of the building. The air smelled like dry dust and old engine oil, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and follows you home. Every few steps, Marcus paused and listened, not for dramatic reasons, for practical ones. A cough, a door hinge, footsteps that didn't belong to us. When we reached the side entrance, I saw a fresh tire track in the dirt, darker than the rest, like it hadn't had time to bake into the ground. Marcus pointed at it once. Then he pointed at the door. The lock wasn't new, but it was clean, touched recently. Marcus pulled on a pair of thin work gloves, the kind you'd use to change a filter or handle hot metal, and he crouched near the latch. I watched his hands move with the patience of someone who has spent a lifetime fixing things without making noise. No hero stuff, no rush, just steady. After a few seconds, there was a soft click. He opened the door an inch, then stopped, holding his breath like the building itself might notice. Nothing. No alarm. No voices. He eased it wider, and we slipped inside. The temperature dropped immediately. Outside, the desert heat still clung to the earth. Inside, it felt like the place had been holding on to the coolness of decades. The room was a wide open floor with old shelving and torn tarps. A couple of broken desks shoved against a wall. Crates stacked like someone started organizing and then gave up. There was a faint buzzing sound from somewhere, an old fluorescent light fighting to stay alive. And right in the middle of it, under that weak light, was a folding table. Clean. Too clean. On the table were papers laid out in neat stacks, held down at the corners with small stones, like whoever set them there didn't want the wind to undo their work. Maps. Not the kind tourists buy at a gas station. These were survey maps, grid lines, coordinates, handwritten notes in the margins. Next to them were copies of land deeds, folded and unfolded so many times the creases looked tired. And then there were contracts. Thick, official-looking documents with initials on every page. I didn't need to read every line to feel my stomach turn, because at the bottom of the first one, in crisp ink, was a signature I'd known since childhood. Veronica Hale. I froze. Not in a dramatic way, in the way your body freezes when it finally stops hoping. Marcus stepped closer, careful not to touch anything with bare skin. He leaned in and read quietly, like he was reading a warning label. "Lease agreement," he murmured. "Extraction rights. Term length. 10 years. He turned a page. "There's more," he said. I moved closer, and my eyes caught on a set of names in the middle of the document. Not mine, not hers. Companies, third parties, shell names that sounded harmless on purpose. And then tucked underneath, another sheet, a transfer record. It showed parcels of land being reassigned, shifted like chess pieces. Lines of text that explained, in legal language, how a person could take something without ever stepping foot on it. I stared at the paper until my eyes started to burn. "This is why," I whispered. Marcus didn't answer. He didn't need to, because I could see it now. The loud part of betrayal, the phone calls, the speeches, the moral lectures, that was just theatre. The real control was quiet. It lived in envelopes and forms and signatures. It lived in the places most people never look because they don't want to believe they have to. I picked up one of the maps by the edge, using the tip of my glove like Marcus had shown me, and I saw markings around a section of land that made my chest tighten. That was our land, or it had been. The old boundary lines were there, faint and familiar, like a ghost of what should have been.
And beside it, in newer ink, were revised lines. Tighter, smaller, like someone had taken a blade to our history and trimmed it down. I swallowed hard. She didn't just take it, I said. She reshaped it. Marcus stared at the documents like he was measuring the weight of them. The strongest person in the room isn't always the one who talks, he said quietly. It's the one holding the paperwork. I felt my jaw tighten. All this time, I thought she'd won because she had money, because she had connections, because she could smile and speak clean and make people believe her. But standing there, in that cold old building, I realized the truth was worse. She won because she prepared, because she filed things while I was putting out fires in my own life, because she understood that if she controlled the record, she controlled the story. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out his phone. He didn't take pictures fast. He took them like evidence mattered. Wide shot. Close shot. Signature. Page numbers. Dates. And then he paused when he saw something tucked under the last stack. A manila folder, thicker than the others. He slid it out slowly and opened it. Inside were copies of old filings, notes, a timeline written in someone's careful handwriting, and at the top, a single line that made the air leave my lungs. It had my name on it again. Not as an owner, not as family, as a problem. Marcus looked at me. I couldn't speak, because in that moment, the betrayal stopped being a feeling. It became a system, a plan, a set of steps someone had taken over years, not days, to make sure I stayed small, stayed silent, stayed easy to erase. Marcus closed the folder carefully. Then he glanced toward the door. "We're not alone," he said, barely moving his lips. And from somewhere deeper in the building, I heard it. The soft scrape of a shoe on concrete, coming closer. The footsteps stopped just outside the doorway. For a second, the whole building held its breath. Then a voice drifted in, light and annoyed, like someone walking into a room they already owned. "Hello?" I knew that voice before I saw her. Veronica. Marcus's hand lifted slightly, not as a threat, just as a signal to stay still. He didn't rush. He didn't panic. He waited until her heels clicked past the shelves and into the weak pool of fluorescent light. And there she was. Clean jeans, a fitted jacket, hair done like she'd been somewhere nicer before she came here. Even out in a dead mining building, she looked like she belonged on a stage. Her eyes landed on me, and for the briefest moment, something flickered across her face. Not guilt, surprise. Like she'd just found a weed growing through concrete and couldn't believe it had the nerve. "Arthur," she said, dragging my name out slow. "What are you doing here?" I didn't answer right away. I stared at the papers on the table, the maps, the contracts, her signature. The folder with my name typed at the top like a warning label. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "I could ask you the same thing." Her gaze moved to Marcus, then back to me. "Oh," she said, "so you brought help." It wasn't a question. It was a judgment. Marcus stepped forward half a pace, careful to stay in the light where cameras could have seen him if there were any. He always thought about things like that. "We're just looking," Marcus said, calm, "at paperwork." Veronica smiled like he'd told a joke. "You don't understand what you're looking at." That was her favorite move. Not a denial, a dismissal. Like the truth didn't count unless she explained it. I pulled a copy of the lease agreement closer, keeping my fingers on the edge the way Marcus taught me. 10-year extraction rights, I said, signed by you. Veronica didn't flinch. She sighed like I'd just spilled coffee on her rug. "And," she said, "do you know what it takes to keep land in this area? Do you know what it costs to fight off developers, regulators, drought, wildfire, everything?" Her voice rose on the right words. She was performing now, because that's what she did when she felt control slipping. I looked at her and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not hate, clarity. "You told me you couldn't help me," I said. "You told me you were stretched thin. You told me it wasn't your responsibility to rescue me from my choices." Veronica's eyes narrowed. "Because it wasn't," she snapped. "You made your bed, Arthur." There it was, the moral speech, the clean, easy sentence that made her feel righteous while she did something rotten. I breathed in slowly. Then I asked the question that had been chewing through me for weeks. "How long?" She blinked. "What?" "How long have you been writing my story for me?" I said. "How long have you been making sure my name stayed dirty, stayed small, stayed easy to erase?" Veronica's smile returned, thin as paper. "You're being dramatic." That word, dramatic, was how she turned pain into an inconvenience. Marcus reached into his jacket and placed his phone on the table, screen facing up. Recording. Veronica noticed it and laughed again. "Go ahead," she said. "Record. Like that's going to change reality." Reality. She always said it like she owned it. I picked up one of the maps and slid it toward her. "These boundaries were changed," I said. "These parcels were reassigned. And right after the wildfire, my name disappears." Veronica leaned in, glanced down, then looked back up like she was bored. "Because you would have ruined it," she said, matter of fact. "You would have panicked. You would have sold to the first person waving cash. You don't think long term. You never have." I felt my jaw tighten. She said it the same way someone says, "You can't handle a sharp knife." Like she was protecting me. Like she was protecting the world from me. "So you took it," I said. "That's your excuse?" "It's not an excuse," she said. "It's the truth." She stepped closer, lowering her voice like she was giving me a private lesson. "I held this family together after Mom and Dad were gone," she said. "I kept things running when you were drifting. I made hard decisions. You should be thanking me." I stared at her, and in that moment something clicked. There's a kind of person who never raises their hand to hit you. They don't have to. They use words like ropes. They tie them around your mind and pull until you start believing you deserve the ground you're standing on. That's what Veronica did. She didn't just refuse me a bed when my land burned. She handed me a story that said I was the problem, and she expected me to wear it. I set the map down gently. Then I said, "You were too private to let me sleep on your couch, but you weren't too private to track me, to label me, to rewrite me." Her eyes flashed. "That's not what this is." "It is," I said. "Because if this was love, real love, you would have told me no and stepped back. You would have let me fail on my own. You would have left me alone." Veronica scoffed.
I did leave you alone.
No, I said, my voice still calm. You left me without help, and then you made sure nobody else helped either. The room went quiet. Even Marcus didn't move. Veronica's face tightened like she'd been slapped. And then she did what she always did when she couldn't win on facts. She tried to win on authority. You don't get to come in here and judge me, she said. You don't get to destroy everything I've built. I held her gaze. I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm looking at what you built. She breathed hard through her nose. You want the truth, she said. Fine. Here's the truth. You're not strong enough for what this land requires. You never were. So I handled it. I did what needed to be done.
And I'm supposed to accept that? I said.
Yes, she said, sharp, because I'm your sister.
And because you will mess it up. You will ruin it. You will ruin us. There was the line, the final mask slipping. Not concern, ownership. When someone believes they have the right to decide your fate, they don't call it control. They call it family. I looked at Marcus, then back at Veronica, and something in me shifted. For most of my life, I'd played the role she handed me, the quiet one, the grateful one, the one who kept the peace even when the peace was killing him. I used to think being kind meant absorbing whatever people threw at me. I used to think if I explained myself enough, if I stayed calm enough, if I proved my intentions, she'd finally see me. But I realized something standing there in that cold building. The kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop trying to rescue someone who has chosen to harm you. Not with anger, with structure, with distance, with proof. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't insult her. I didn't beg. I just said, "You don't get to decide what I'm capable of." Veronica laughed once, but it sounded strained.
And what are you going to do, Arthur? She asked. March into town with a stack of dusty papers? Who's going to believe you?
I looked at the phone on the table, still recording. Then I looked at the contracts, and I said, "The people who read paperwork." Marcus's hand slid the phone closer to him. Veronica's eyes narrowed like she finally understood. Not that I was angry, that I was done. And for the first time that night, her confidence wavered. Because she wasn't facing a brother she could shame anymore. She was facing a man who had stopped trying to win her heart and started protecting his life. I didn't sleep much after that night. Not because I was scared of the dark, or because I thought Veronica was going to kick down the door. It was quieter than that. It was the feeling of finally seeing the shape of something that had been hanging over my life for years, and realizing it had a name. Control. 2 days later, Marcus came by the little room I was renting behind a mechanic's shop. It smelled like oil and old cardboard. The swamp cooler rattled like it was coughing. My kitchen was a hot plate on a folding table. Marcus set a paper bag down and pulled out 2 coffees. He handed me one like it was routine, like I hadn't just watched my own sister admit she'd been steering my future with a pen. Then he said, "We're not going back to talk." I stared at him over the rim of the cup. "We already did," I said. Marcus shook his head. "No," he said. "We listened. Now we move." That was the difference between Marcus and most people I'd known. Most people treat truth like a weapon. They swing it around, hoping it makes the other person flinch. Marcus treated truth like a tool, something you use the right way. The next morning he picked me up before sunrise. The desert was still purple and cold. The air smelled like dust and creosote. His tanker truck idled while I climbed in, careful with my knees.
On the seat between us was a manila envelope, thick, labeled in black marker. Hale Property/Documents. Marcus didn't look at me when he said it. Today, he said, we do this boring. I almost laughed. It came out more like a breath. Boring? I said. Marcus nodded. Boring is how you win, he said. People like Veronica count on drama. They count on you yelling. They count on you making a scene so they can call you unstable. He tapped the envelope with 2 fingers. This, he said, is the opposite of a scene. Inside were copies of everything we'd pulled from the mining building. The leases, the maps, the old environmental file Marcus found, with my name still sitting in it like a ghost that refused to leave. He'd also made a timeline. Dates, addresses, names of agencies, who filed what.
When my land record changed, when the incident report got attached to my name, it was all laid out like a straight road, and that was when I understood the new rule. People who want to bury you don't need to kill you. They just need to make sure nobody takes you seriously. And the cheapest way to do that is to ruin your name. You can't argue your way out of a ruined name. You have to document your way out. So we started with the county. The building looked like every county office in every struggling town. Faded flag out front, sun-bleached posters on the wall telling you to pay your taxes on time. We took a number. We sat. I watched a man argue with the clerk about a dog license like it was the end of the world, and I thought, this is it? This is where your life gets decided? Not in some big courtroom with a judge banging a gavel. In a waiting room that smells like old carpet and disappointment. When it was our turn, Marcus did most of the talking. But he didn't talk like a bully. He talked like a man who knew exactly what he had in his hands. He slid the folder across the counter. We need to file a dispute on a property record change, he said, and we need the clerk to confirm when the amendment was processed and under whose authority. The clerk blinked, then looked at me. I could feel that old instinct rising, the urge to explain myself, to soften the truth so it wouldn't sound like an accusation. But Marcus had warned me. The moment you turn this into feelings, the other side wins. So I kept my voice steady. I want the paper trail, I said, not opinions. The clerk's expression shifted slightly, like she'd heard that sentence before from someone who'd learned it the hard way. She nodded and printed out forms. We spent 3 hours there. 3 hours of signatures, copies, stamps. We drove across town to the assessor's office, then the water district. Then an environmental compliance desk that was basically one guy in a small office with 2 monitors and a fan pointing at his face. At each place, Marcus repeated the same calm request. We're here to correct a record. We're here to request a review. We're here to submit supporting documentation. And every time, I felt something strange. Power. Not the loud kind, not the kind that comes from money or influence. The kind that comes from doing the right thing in the right order. By the 3rd day, Veronica started calling. At first, it was just 1 missed call, then 3, then 6. Her voicemail came through like poison wrapped in perfume. Arthur, don't do this. You're going to embarrass yourself. Then, this is going to get complicated. I'm trying to protect you. Then, call me back. We can handle this like family. Family. That word again, like a leash. Marcus didn't tell me to ignore her. He didn't tell me to answer her. He just said, save everything. So I did. I didn't delete a single voicemail. I didn't block her. I let her talk. Because every time she called, it proved she was watching the process. And if she was watching, that meant she was scared. On the 5th day, we went to a small legal aid office that operated out of a strip mall between a thrift store and a payday loan place.
The sign in the window was crooked, the waiting chairs were mismatched, but the woman behind the desk had the kind of eyes that told you she'd seen every version of human behavior. Marcus handed her the folder. She flipped through it slowly, her face unreadable. Then she looked up at me. "How old are you, Mr. Hale?" she asked. 63, I said. She nodded once. "And this happened after the wildfire?" "Yes," I said. She leaned back in her chair. "What she did," she said carefully, "is not just family cruelty. This is paperwork cruelty. And paperwork cruelty is the easiest kind to prove, if you have what you need."
Marcus glanced at me like, "See, boring wins." The woman made copies. She wrote down dates. She told us which offices to send formal requests to and which ones to avoid until we had a response. And before we left, she said something that sat heavy in my chest. "Don't confront her again," she said. "Don't negotiate in the dark. People like this want you emotional. They want you alone. You stay in the daylight now." That night, I sat on the edge of my bed and listened to the desert wind tap the window like a visitor. My phone buzzed again. Veronica. I watched it ring until it stopped. Then another voicemail came in. Her voice was sharper now. "You think you're being smart," she hissed. "You're not. You're being manipulated. That man is using you." I stared at the screen, and for a second, the old doubt tried to crawl back in. What if she's right? What if I'm making this worse? Then I remembered something Marcus had said early on, back when all he was to me was a stranger behind a steering wheel. He told me, if the truth makes someone panic, it's not because you're wrong, it's because you're close. I saved the voicemail. I added it to the folder. And I realized something else. Familiar people win with emotion. They know your soft spots, your guilt, your history. They can press those buttons without even raising their voice. But steady people? Steady people win with process. They don't need to shout. They just need to keep walking the same direction, with the paperwork in their hands. And somewhere in the middle of that quiet, boring week, I stopped feeling like a man begging to be believed. I started feeling like a man building a case. And Veronica could feel it, because her calls weren't trying to convince me anymore. They were trying to stop time.
But time doesn't stop when you finally choose the right kind of silence. It speeds up. And that's when I knew everything was about to change. A week after we started filing paperwork, I stopped measuring time in days. I measured it in envelopes, certified letters, case numbers, confirmation emails, receipts with ink that smeared if you touched it too soon. That's what my life became for a while. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just recorded. And that's when something strange happened. The world got quieter. Veronica stopped leaving long voicemails. Her messages got shorter, sharper, like she was running out of room. "Arthur, you need to stop. Call me back now. This is going to hurt you more than it hurts me." That last one made me sit on the edge of my bed and stare at the wall for a full minute. Because that's what people say when they're used to being untouchable. They can't imagine a consequence that doesn't orbit around their comfort. Marcus and I were at the county building again when the first real shift came. Same cracked tile floor, same old clock on the wall that always seemed 5 minutes behind. We were waiting for a clerk to bring out a stamped copy of one of our filings when a man in a button-down shirt stepped into the lobby. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He didn't have a badge on his belt. But the way people moved when he walked in told you he didn't come to argue about a dog license. He went straight to the counter, spoke quietly, and handed over a card. The clerk's posture changed immediately. She looked at Marcus, then at me. And then she said,
"Mr. Hale, can you come back here for a moment?"
My stomach tightened. That old fear tried to grab the wheel again. The fear that says, they're going to laugh. They're going to say you don't matter. They're going to tell you to go home. I followed her through a door into a small office with a humming printer and a stack of folders on a metal shelf.
The man in the button-down was there. He introduced himself with a calm voice and a name I won't repeat here because this isn't about him. It's about what he said next. "We've opened an inquiry," he told me, "regarding the land lease and the environmental incident report attached to your name." I felt my throat go dry. "Inquiry?" I repeated, like I didn't know what the word meant. He nodded. "Your documentation raised concerns," he said, "not just about the lease, about the process, about signatures, about who benefited." He didn't say Veronica's name right away. He didn't need to. Because when you're dealing with paper trails, names don't come first. Patterns do. Then he slid a thin packet across the desk. It was an official notice, the kind with the heavy header at the top and the language that doesn't care about feelings. It stated that the extraction rights tied to that lease were being suspended pending review. Suspended. I stared at the word like it was written in another language. Marcus was standing behind me, quiet as ever, but I could feel him watching, waiting to see if I'd crumble or breathe. I didn't crumble. I just asked the question that mattered. "So what happens now?" I said. The man looked at me steadily. "Now," he said, "we verify what's legitimate, and we unwind what isn't." Unwind. That word hit me differently than punish, because punishment is loud. It makes good stories. Unwinding is cold. It's what happens when the system finally treats a lie like an error that needs correcting. No shouting, no speeches. Just a hand reaching in and pulling the thread until the whole knot comes apart. 2 weeks after that, a letter arrived at my rental address. Not from Veronica, not from a lawyer trying to scare me. From the regional office overseeing land and environmental compliance. It confirmed what we'd been pushing for since the beginning. My name was being removed from the incident record. The hazard label was being corrected. The public note that had followed me into job applications and background checks was gone. Just like that. I read that paragraph 3 times. Then I read it a 4th, slower, like if I rushed it, it might disappear. And here's the thing nobody tells you about being cleared. It doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like someone finally took a heavy coat off your shoulders and you didn't realize how much it was weighing you down until it was gone. That same week, Marcus and I stopped at a diner off the highway, the kind with faded booths and a waitress who calls everyone hun. We slid into a corner, and Marcus ordered coffee like it was a daily ritual. I watched 2 men at the counter talk about the weather, about gas prices, about nothing. And I realized the world didn't stop spinning while my life was being rewritten. It just kept going. The difference now was I could go with it again. Then Veronica called, for the first time in days. I let it ring twice before answering, not because I wanted to hear her voice, but because I wanted one thing, to hear what losing sounds like. "Arthur," she said, too calm, too controlled. "What did you do?" I looked out the diner window at the flat, sun-bleached horizon, and I kept my voice even. "I didn't do anything," I said. "I filed what was true." There was a pause, a long one. And in that silence, I could almost picture her in whatever clean, expensive room she was standing in, trying to find the right emotional button to press. But that's the problem with paperwork. It doesn't have buttons. It has dates, signatures, numbers that don't care who you are. Her voice came back lower, tighter. "You're making me look like a criminal," she said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I just said the only honest thing.
"If the evidence makes you look like something," I told her, "that's not my doing." Then I hung up. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I needed anyone's approval to breathe. Because real justice doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need applause. It just needs proof. And once the proof is in the light, the lie can't live there anymore. I thought getting my name cleared would feel like a finish line, like someone would hand me my old life back and say, "There you go, Arthur, you're safe now." But that's not how it happened. What I got back wasn't my old life. It was my choice. And once you've had your choices taken from you, you don't rush to hand them over again, even to the people who share your blood. A month after the inquiry started, the air felt different. Not cooler, not kinder, just less heavy. I could walk into a store without wondering if the person behind the counter had read my name somewhere.
I could fill out an application without thinking. They're going to see that label and toss it in the trash. And at night, when I lay down on that narrow bed in my rented room, the silence didn't feel like punishment anymore. It felt like space. Marcus kept driving his routes, but he started swinging by my place on the days he wasn't hauling. Not with big speeches. He'd show up with a box of nails he didn't need, or a coil of hose that fell off a pallet, like we both didn't know he paid for it. He'd stand in the doorway and look around like he was measuring the walls. Then he'd say something simple. "You eat yet?" Or, "You got a fan in here?" And that was his way of asking, "Are you okay?" Some people show love with words. Marcus showed it with weight and wiring and small repairs that made your days easier. One afternoon, he drove me out past the edge of town to a small piece of land he'd been eyeing for a while. It wasn't much, a flat stretch with scrub brush and a view of the low hills in the distance. But it had one thing my old place didn't have anymore. It had quiet that belonged to nobody but me. Marcus stood with his hands on his hips, squinting into the sun. "I'm not saying you gotta buy anything," he said. "I'm just saying you should see what it feels like to stand somewhere that isn't haunted." That word hit me. Haunted. Because my old farm wasn't just burned. It was haunted by every phone call I made begging for help. Every time I told myself, "She's your sister, she'll come around." Every time I swallowed my pride and got handed a lecture instead of a hand. Standing there in that open desert air, I realized something I didn't want to admit before. I didn't miss the land the most. I missed the idea that I belonged to something. And for most of my life, I thought that something had to be family. The kind you're born into. The kind you're told you owe loyalty to, even when they treat you like a problem to be managed. But what I'd learned, slowly, painfully, was that loyalty without respect isn't love. It's just a leash. A few days later, I got a message from Veronica. Not an apology, not a "I was wrong," just a sentence that tried to slide in like nothing happened. "We should talk like adults." I stared at it for a long time, and I noticed something. There was no "how are you?" no "I'm glad you're okay," no curiosity about the months I spent being treated like I didn't exist. Just the same old assumption that she could call me back into her orbit whenever she wanted. Like I was still standing outside her door, waiting to be let in. I didn't answer. And that was the first time in my life I didn't feel guilty for protecting myself. Because leaving isn't always slamming a door. Sometimes it's just not walking back into the room that keeps hurting you. That winter, I found steady work again.
Nothing glamorous. I helped an older man in town fix fences and clear brush. I patched roofs. I replaced broken posts. I hauled debris. It was honest work, the kind where you see the result at the end of the day, and you sleep better because of it. And on weekends, Marcus and I would drive out early before the heat climbed. We'd bring coffee in dented travel mugs and sit on the tailgate of his rig, watching the sky brighten like a slow promise. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. There's a certain kind of peace that only comes when you're sitting beside someone who isn't trying to change you, isn't trying to own you, isn't trying to rewrite your story to make themselves look clean. One evening we were putting up a small shed frame on that piece of land Marcus had shown me. The sun was dropping behind the hills, turning everything the color of copper. My hands were sore. My shirt was stuck to my back. And Marcus handed me a bottle of water like it was the most natural thing in the world. I took a long drink and looked out over the empty ground, and I realized I wasn't starting over. I was starting right. Because I didn't go back to being the man who kept begging for a seat at a table where he was never welcome. I became the man who built his own table with his own hands. And if someone worthy wanted to sit there, there would be room. That's what a chosen family is. Not blood, not obligation. Just two people who decide, quietly, firmly, I'm not leaving you out in the heat. And for the first time since the fire took everything, the ground under my feet didn't feel like ash. It felt like something that could grow again. If you're still here, there's a chance this story doesn't feel like fiction to you. Because maybe you're not watching this for entertainment. Maybe you're watching because somewhere in your life, someone else is holding the pen, deciding what you're allowed to remember, deciding how your past should be described, deciding which parts of your effort count and which parts get erased. If that's you, I want to say something clearly. Not everyone needs revenge. Not everyone needs to confront the people who hurt them. But everyone needs three things, whether they admit it or not. Boundaries, records, and the right to walk away. For a long time, I thought staying silent made me weak. I thought if I just explained myself better, stayed calmer, proved I was reasonable enough, they would finally see me. What I didn't understand back then was this. People who benefit from your silence will call it peace. People who benefit from your compliance will call it family. And people who are rewriting your story will always tell you it's for your own good. That's how control hides, not in shouting, not in threats, but in calm voices that say, this is just how things have to be. Here's the hard truth I learned too late. You don't need to beat them at their game. You don't need to expose them publicly. You don't even need them to admit what they did. You just need to stop letting them write the next chapter of your life. That starts quietly. It starts with keeping your documents, saving messages, writing things down when they happen, even if you think you'll never need them. It starts with choosing who gets access to you and who doesn't. And sometimes, it starts with leaving a room you were never meant to survive in. Walking away doesn't mean you lose. It means you refuse to keep paying a cost that keeps getting higher. If you're waiting for permission to protect yourself, this is it. If you're waiting for a sign that you're not crazy for feeling erased, this is it. And if you're waiting for someone to tell you that choosing yourself doesn't make you selfish, this is it. I didn't win because I destroyed someone else. I won because I stopped shrinking to fit a story that was hurting me. If this story connected with you, I'd like to know. Not your name, not your details, just the city you're watching from. It reminds me that quiet battles are happening everywhere, and that none of us are as alone as we think. And if you're still inside a situation like this, remember one thing. You don't need to win them over. You just need to survive long enough to choose yourself. That choice changes everything.